Her whole body would turn red. I didn't know what in the world was happening with her.
I wasn't getting the answers that I wanted to hear.
I kept getting worse and worse.
She needed help showering. She needed help going to the bathroom.
He was shocked at how much she had deteriorated.
I just wanted someone to give us an answer.
Next, two medical mysteries that defied the experts. When the normally active Carol Battle takes a terrifying fall, her family is caught off guard. Little do they know, it's just the first in a series of dangerous episodes that will change their lives forever.
I felt helpless.
I was starting to lose faith in the medical system.
Then, Sonia and Sherwood Webb don't think much of the strange, sweet smell coming from their daughter Rachel's diapers. But as the 3-month-old's body begins to shut down in front of their eyes, her parents find themselves facing a life or death decision.
I felt like my worst nightmares were coming true, that I was going to lose a child.
When illness strikes, we look to doctors to give us answers. But what if they can't? For these unlucky patients, diagnosis is a mystery. In the spring of 1954, both Carol Patterson and Richard Battle were still in high school. But when they met in a local pizza parlor in Rochester, New York, they knew it was for keeps.
I met Carol through my cousin. I kind of like blondes, and she was a blonde. She caught my eye.
I love Richard very much.
Carol was my high school sweetheart. She was just an all-around good person. We were married in June 1961.
To support themselves, Richard took jobs working on construction sites, while Carol pursued a career as a watercolor artist.
When she has a paintbrush in her hand, there's a smile on her face. You can't get rid of it.
Painting reflects my soul.
She painted a lot of nature scenes, and people just liked her work. She made a good living with it.
In fact, Carol was a dynamo, quickly establishing a reputation as an accomplished local artist, while supervising a bustling household of 4 children.
I would describe my mom as kind of a whirlwind. She was in high gear all the time.
She would paint. She would take the kids to football practice and baseball. She would clean the house. She was just a nonstop person.
As the years passed, Carol's enthusiasm only seemed to grow. And by the start of 2006, she found herself basking in the glow of a happy, healthy life. Little did she know, it was all about to change forever.
We went to the grocery store to do our shopping, and she was kind of unsteady. And she grabbed the cart.
Now it's being to the right.
She really couldn't let go of the cart without tipping. So I had to hold her to keep her balance, kind of guide her. I started to really worry then. We went to the doctor's office, and he gave her different tests. He checked her eyes and her ears and her nose and her throat and everything.
The doctor thought that she may have had labyrinthitis.
Labyrinthitis is a severe infection of the inner ear. Because the inner ear controls balance, patients with the condition are often unsteady on their feet.
The doctor prescribed an antibiotic.
But the medication did not help me.
In fact, over the next few days, Carol's balance issues only get worse.
I had to put my arm around her, or she would put her arm around me, and she would really be leaning on me more and more.
She physically wasn't able to walk.
She said that she felt like she was intoxicated all the time and just seemed to be getting worse each day.
Then, 3 weeks to the day after receiving the labyrinthitis diagnosis, a frightening new development literally stops Carol dead in her tracks.
I was in the kitchen and I bent over and I felt very dizzy.
Carol had fallen on the floor. She says, I lost my balance. She started to cry then, and she said that something is wrong.
I didn't have any balance to walk. I felt helpless.
My father called me that day, and I basically said, we need to call a doctor right away. Something is not right.
Within the hour, Carol and her family are back in the exam room.
He was shocked at how much she had deteriorated. The doctor thought that Carol might have a brain tumor.
I was very, very scared.
I could not believe that within a month's time, they thought she had an ear infection, and the next thing you know, they're talking about a brain tumor. It was shocking. The doctor recommended that we go and get an MRI done to check to see if there was a tumor.
The appointment was early morning.
My mom was fearful of the actual exam because they said you'd have to lay there for quite a bit of time while the images were taken. So she was really nervous.
But the wait for the test results themselves is even more unnerving.
Carol and me and the whole family were just on edge for 2 full days.
My worst fear was it was going to be something that was inoperable.
Carol and I got the news early morning. When the phone rang, I talked to the doctor. He immediately told me that the test came out negative. There was no tumor.
I was thrilled in one breath and still very concerned in the next, because that meant there was no answer to what was going on.
For the last 2 months, 65-year-old artist Carol Battle has been suffering a mysterious and terrifying decline. First losing her coordination, and then her balance altogether. But most horrifying of all is the realization that she can no longer paint.
She had to mix colors to get the color that she wanted, and her hand wasn't doing what her mind wanted it to do.
I was very worried about not painting again.
This was devastating to her.
I knew how much she loved it, and this was her whole life, and now it's being taken away from her.
Desperate for answers, the family sets up an appointment with a local neurologist, Dr. Derek Alemo.
I first came into contact with the Battles on April 7th, 2006. I was very concerned because her symptoms had progressed so rapidly.
After performing a thorough examination, Dr. Alemo begins to lead Carol through a series of specialized tests.
One of the ways that I used to test her coordination was to have her touch my finger and then touch her nose, and she had a lot of difficulty doing so. I had her walk around the room, but she actually required 2 persons to help her. A number of her symptoms, including her difficulty with coordination, were consistent with multiple sclerosis.
It was very scary to hear him say MS, because I don't think there's a cure for it.
She'd already had an MRI of the brain, which was negative, but I felt it necessary also to obtain an MRI of the neck in order to assess the spinal cord.
We were desperate at the time. We thought for sure the second MRI would show something.
But the MRI of the neck did not show any evidence of multiple sclerosis.
Over the next 2 weeks, Carol returns to the doctor and undergoes test after test. But incredibly, not a single one turns up anything even remotely out of the ordinary.
I thought of Mrs. Battle's condition as a mystery. I'd never seen a patient that had displayed the same type of symptoms as Mrs. Battle.
With no answer in sight, Carol finds herself rapidly slipping into a state of profound disability.
She needed help going to the bathroom. She needed help getting her pants up and down. We had to buy a chair that sits in the shower, and I'd have to help her get in. And I would help her if she needed help showering.
She is a remarkable daughter.
She was strong. She was strong. She thanked me for helping her, but never complained.
With her mysterious condition worsening by the day, the Battles ultimately make a very difficult decision. They get Carol a wheelchair.
Carol was home the day I brought the wheelchair home. She just looked at it and didn't have any response.
I think for her, she viewed that as she wasn't going to be able to walk anymore.
It devastated me and my family. They're not used to seeing their mother that was so vibrant and running all over in a wheelchair.
Every once in a while, in clinical practice, you run up against a case which is quite challenging, and this is one of those cases. It is quite difficult to not have the answer. She was becoming more and more debilitated. She was losing more and more function. I felt the clock was running out.
Desperate for anything that could help shed light on Carol's deterioration, Dr. Alemo redoubles his efforts, analyzing the symptoms from every possible angle and combing through volumes of medical resources. Then, just when it feels as if he's hit another brick wall, the neurologist stumbles onto what could be the first piece of the puzzle.
I had a hunch that she might have an extremely rare disease. I told the Battles that I needed Mrs. Battle to get a blood test. Testing her blood for this condition was a long shot, but we had to try.
The nurse came to our home to do the blood test because the doctor saw that it was difficult for my mom to get out and about.
The blood tests took approximately a week to come back.
And I remember us sitting on the edge of our seat every day. At this point, I just wanted someone to give us an answer.
For the last 4 months, 65-year-old Carol Battle has been losing the ability to carry out even the simplest of tasks. She can't walk or hold a glass of water. But neurologist Dr. Derek Alemo has just received the results of a specialized blood test, and Carol's family is now on their way to his office to hear the report in person.
We were very anxious on the drive to the doctor's office. Tension was very high.
Once there, the doctor wastes no time delivering his findings. But what he says makes little sense to the family.
The blood test was positive for the anti-Yo antibody.
And we all kind of laughed, all three of us at the same time, and I said, leave it to you, Mom, to get something called anti-Yo.
And he says, it's not funny.
Dr. Alemo said, I'm certain that your mother has cancer. But I don't know where the cancer is. That was terrifying. My mother and I started crying immediately.
We were devastated.
But then Dr. Alemo drops another bombshell. There's even worse news. The cancer itself isn't the actual cause of Carol's coordination and balance problems.
She had paraneoplastic cerebellar degeneration.
Paraneoplastic cerebellar degeneration, or PCD, is a rare and deadly autoimmune disease. Most healthy individuals produce antibodies to fight off dangerous foreign substances. Generally, these antibodies are powerless against cancer. But in patients like Carol, for some unknown reason, the body produces a unique cancer-fighting agent called an anti-Yo antibody. And while it aggressively attacks reproductive cancers, it also targets certain parts of the brain.
The anti-Yo antibodies attack both the cancer cells and the brain cells because both of these cells have the same types of proteins on their surfaces. It's almost as if the anti-Yo antibody is confused and not only fighting off the cancer, but by mistake is attacking the brain cells.
Doctors believe that the anti-Yo antibodies almost always attack the cancer first and only go after the brain once the cancer is mostly contained.
It's possible that Mrs. Battle could have had the cancer for even years, but the anti-Yo antibody was keeping it in check. The paraneoplastic cerebellar degeneration did not become evident until it had already destroyed a significant number of brain cells. I was shocked that she was alive after having her brain attacked for so long.
I wanted to know, what did it mean? What was it going to do? What was the life expectancy? I wanted to know everything.
Unfortunately, the disease has already done major damage to an area of Carol's brain called the cerebellum.
The cerebellum is a part of the brain which is located in the back of the skull and is involved in controlling the coordination of the body's motor function. Mrs. Battle's problems with coordination were related to damage as a direct result from the anti-Yo antibody.
We couldn't believe that she had something like this.
The main way to stop paraneoplastic cerebellar degeneration is to find and eliminate the cancer so that the anti-Yo antibody no longer will attack the brain. But finding the cancer in this situation was like finding a needle in the haystack.
The best bet for locating the cancer is a PET scan, a high-resolution imaging technique.
At this point, it was kind of the opposite of what most people think, which is you go in for these tests and you don't want to see anything. We were actually hoping to see just the opposite. We wanted something to show up.
The wait was terrible.
After 7 long days, the findings are back. But the results only confirm the family's worst fears.
The PET scan came back negative. Now we're still in the same boat. We felt helpless.
We were very frustrated. We knew that it was cancer, but where? And we knew it had to go, but when and how were we going to find it?
Carol Battle has just been diagnosed with paraneoplastic cerebellar degeneration. Essentially, rare antibodies produced to fight cancer are now attacking her brain. And the only way to stop the disease is to eliminate the cancer completely. But so far, doctors can't find it. And every day that goes by, Carol suffers more brain damage.
Because we did not find the cancer on the PET scan, we were very concerned that her prognosis could be grave.
Desperate to find a way to save his patient, Dr. Alemo makes a radical suggestion.
In this case, in which we were unable to find the cancer in a non-invasive manner, I recommended that she have a hysterectomy.
Because PCD is almost always associated with cancer of the reproductive organs, the growth is likely to be hiding somewhere in Carol's uterus or fallopian tubes.
It was not a difficult decision to get a hysterectomy.
As soon as Carol's reproductive organs are removed from her body, they are sent to the lab for further testing. If there's still no sign of cancer, the Battle family will be back to square one. But by then, it may simply be too late.
As the days went by, I kept getting worse and worse.
Her speech was starting to be affected, and she started slurring.
When she would get tired, it was harder to understand her.
I was embarrassed.
Her speech impediment and slurred speech were a result of damage to her cerebellum, which controls the coordination of the mouth.
I was starting to lose faith in the medical system.
We were really getting frustrated because we were running out of time.
But just when the family thinks they can't take any more, they get the news they've been waiting for.
They told us that they found a minute speck of cancer in her fallopian tubes. Well, before the nurse even finished, I just let out a big hooray, she's got cancer, which sounds terrible, but in this situation, it was the savior. And I told Carol immediately.
Finally, I knew what was causing the PCD.
Since the cancer has been removed from her body, she will no longer be producing the anti-Yo antibody.
Unfortunately, getting rid of the cancer is just the first step. While Carol's body has stopped creating new anti-yo antibodies, the ones still in her bloodstream can continue to wreak havoc on her brainstem.
In order to prevent further damage to the cerebellum, the anti-yo antibody has to be eliminated as quickly as possible. One of the ways to remove the anti-yo antibody is to perform plasmapheresis, which is a type of washing of the blood similar to dialysis.
For 5 months, Carol undergoes the life-saving procedure. Then, in January of '07, the Battles get the news they've been waiting close to a year for. Carol is disease-free.
When I got the news, I immediately told her, and she just gave a big smile, like, thank God.
Getting rid of the anti-yo antibodies for good cannot undo the devastating effects of the disease.
Even though the cancer was removed, her chances for a full recovery would still remain very slim because the cerebellum would be unlikely to heal itself.
And some people recover from it, some people don't. And that shocked us.
Dr. Alemo, however, assures the Battles that the damage will progress no further. And had the PCD not been caught when it was, the results could have been truly catastrophic.
Without a diagnosis, Mrs. Battles' worst-case scenario would be that she might become completely debilitated, living in a nursing home, or even die.
While the family is forever thankful that Carol's disease was caught in time, they can't help but wonder why it took so long to get a diagnosis.
Many times, paraneoplastic cerebellar degeneration is never diagnosed because it is so rare.
We got lucky.
Today, Carol uses a wheelchair to get around safely and has to struggle to speak. But nothing has dampened her optimism or her spirit.
My mother's very, very positive, always. She is still a rock. She still jokes about things. She is very strong.
She's taking this better than I think I would. Losing her mobility, losing her art, which was her whole world. She never complained about any of it. Never had a bad word about what she's been put through.
I'm in good spirits, and I don't have any pain, so I'm happy about that. There are a lot of people worse off than me.
While Carol Battle experienced a devastating decline after years of good health, Rachel Webb was plagued from birth with a mysterious syndrome that would take her and her entire family to the brink. In the fall of 1990, 23-year-old Sonya Webb and her 25-year-old husband Sherwood were focused on one thing: raising their baby girl, Sarah, in Pine Tops, North Carolina.
I very much enjoyed my experience that we were having with Sarah.
They both had good jobs. Sonya was a nurse and Sherwood a supervisor at the local gas company. Life was sweet for the Webbs, and the only thing that could make it better was adding to the family.
We decided to have another child because we were enjoying being parents.
And we had always both wanted a big family.
It's not long before Sonya is pregnant again, and the next 9 months just seem to fly by.
When I got pregnant, I was ecstatic. Loved the feeling of expecting and being pregnant. I couldn't wait for Sarah to have a brother or sister.
Sonya goes into labor on July 14th, 1992, and later that evening gives birth to a baby girl they name Rachel.
I was breastfeeding her just as I had her sister, and she seemed to be taken to that fine and was eating well and going to sleep and just being that perfect baby again for us.
But just 2 days after they bring their newborn home, Sherwood notices something very strange.
I was at home with Rachel and changing her diaper, and I can remember a sweet smell in her urine. Nothing that we ever experienced with Sarah. I called Sonya in to smell too.
The smell wasn't real potently sweet smelling, but It did have a maple syrup-like smell. I didn't think about it being anything serious.
Their lack of concern, however, is short-lived. When less than 48 hours later, the Webbs are jarred awake by a blood-curdling sound.
We were woken up by Rachel's screams. I call it a screeching cry. It's just a very eerie cry.
Her whole body would turn red. She would just hold her head back and cry. Her whole body would like bend up. I had never experienced crying like that.
Rachel cries incessantly for the next 2 days, stopping only for an hour or less at a time to sleep.
And just hearing that so often was very distressing and upsetting because I was unable to do anything about it, and I was her mom. I should be able to, pacify her and make her content.
At Rachel's one-week checkup, the Webbs asked the pediatrician about Rachel's non-stop, ear-piercing crying fits.
And during the visit for the checkup, she did have a full physical. The physician listened to her heart and her lungs. He did the thumping sounds on her abdomen. The physician said she just has colic.
Colic is a condition in which an otherwise healthy infant cries for more than 3 hours a day. Doctors suspect that an immature digestive system triggers the fits.
Hearing the physician say that Rachel had colic was a big relief. We'll get through this and it'll go away eventually.
But it's not long before a disturbing new symptom emerges. The baby won't eat.
Every time you would try to feed Rachel, you could only get a few ounces in her. She would suck the nipple 2 or 3 times, and then she would turn her head away.
We were actually forcing food on her. It was very scary. We went back to the local pediatrician.
After performing a careful exam, the doctor is also alarmed by Rachel's weight. It's clear she's behind the standard growth curve, so he switches her to a different formula and offers Sonia some advice.
We had a nurse come up and make sure that we knew how to feed Rachel using the bottle. I can remember thinking that that was a bit unnecessary. I felt like I knew how to feed Rachel.
Despite their growing misgivings, the Webbs follow doctor's orders, praying that the colic and feeding problems will soon subside. Little do they know, the worst is yet to come.
I was changing her diaper. Her eyes were open, but she was staring off in space. Her eyes wouldn't even blink. She didn't even notice that you had even run your hand in front of her face. She wasn't there in her body.
When I walked in, I remember looking at her and thinking something is terribly wrong.
Sonia immediately goes into nurse mode, tapping Rachel's feet and pinching her skin. But no matter what she does, the 3-month-old remains unresponsive.
I didn't know what in the world was happening with her. We immediately went to the hospital. It was a very scary ride. I had Rachel with me, holding her and making sure that she was still breathing. My heart was pounding. I was scared to death. And I was truly fearful that Rachel was going to die.
Sonia and Sherwood Webb have just found their 3-month-old baby, Rachel, in a strange and terrifying state. She's simply not responding to them in any way. In a state of panic, they've rushed her to the local emergency room. And now, doctors are trying to figure out what's going on.
Having to give Rachel up was very helpless feeling, scared to death that will she make it? Will I see her again?
As the Webbs wait anxiously, the medical team performs a head-to-toe exam and runs some preliminary tests.
Felt helpless, not being able to do anything for her. She was laying there, and they were just running all these different tests, and all the nurses and doctors were trying to find out what was wrong with her.
Making matters worse, Rachel's body appears to be growing more rigid by the hour, leading doctors to suspect she could be suffering from a severe infection.
They thought that she had meningitis. Sherwood and I both were extremely upset.
Meningitis is an inflammation of the membranes surrounding the brain and spinal cord, which can be fatal if it's not caught in time.
They wanted to do the spinal tap, and that's when they stick a needle in her back and draw fluid off of her spinal cord.
The wait is almost unbearable, but 6 long hours later, the findings are in.
The test for spinal meningitis come back negative.
Hearing that Rachel didn't have meningitis was great, but it did not relieve my fears any because I knew something very serious was wrong with Rachel.
And as the night wears on, Rachel seems to be deteriorating right before her parents' eyes.
Rachel was very lifeless-like in that crib. I noticed at that point Rachel had some curling in of her hands in an upward motion, which I knew was a serious sign of neurological problems. And I knew that something terrible was wrong.
But when Sonia suggests that they bring in a neurologist, the doctors shrug her off.
And I knew that if somebody didn't do something quick and find out what was going on with her, that she may not make it.
I wasn't getting the answers that I wanted to hear. I wanted her to be wherever she could receive the best care. I arranged for the rescue squad to come to the hospital to transfer her to Pitt Memorial Hospital.
The next half hour is agony for Sonia and Sherwood as they follow behind the ambulance.
I was probably the most fearful that we would not arrive at the hospital in time for Rachel to be saved.
The moment they arrive at Pitt Memorial, a team of doctors led by pediatrician Dale Newton whisk Rachel away to the pediatric intensive care unit.
We drew additional blood samples and urine samples looking for infection in her blood or in her urine. Those cultures came back negative.
She was just laying there. They had all these needles and IVs running in her.
We weren't sure what was going on, and because of not being sure what was going on, we weren't sure exactly which interventions to provide.
But the tests do indicate that Rachel's blood sugar levels are very low. So Dr. Newton orders an IV of sugar water for the infant right away.
Immediately started IV fluids.
We clung to that hope that something was going to happen, something was going to turn around.
When we first started giving her fluids, over a course of hours, she did seem to slowly improve.
She would open up her eyes, and she didn't have a distant stare.
To see Rachel look at me, we felt like we were moving in the right direction.
As a next step, Dr. Newton decides to try feeding Rachel the old-fashioned way.
She had been fed most recently 10 hours prior to transfer, so we started a small amount of feedings.
Sonia and Sherwood go to bed that night, hopeful that Rachel is on the mend. But when they arrive at the hospital the next morning, they're completely taken aback by the state their daughter is in.
Rachel went into a coma.
A coma is very serious because it means the brain just isn't functioning normally. That affects breathing, that affects heart function. A child can die with that.
I felt like my worst nightmares were coming true, that I was going to lose a child. She didn't respond to my talking to her or holding her hands. It was just very difficult to see her like that.
Just hours ago, 3-month-old baby Rachel Webb seemed to be coming around. But now she's fallen into a coma and is literally hovering between life and death.
At that point in time, it was still very much a mystery as what was going on with this baby. Why is the child in this coma? The survival rate for an infant in this type of coma, probably 25%.
At a point in your life when there's no hope and there's nothing that you can do when it's all out of your hands. I mean, it's very easy to lose hope.
I have 3 sons, and as a parent, I could only feel the angst that I knew this family must be going through, dealing with a baby that was potentially going to die.
The thought of losing my child was something I felt like I would not make it through.
While the Webbs do their best just to keep it together, Dr. Newton takes a step back in an effort to determine what may have triggered Rachel's initial recovery just 3 days ago.
When we first saw Rachel, we were giving her fluids intravenously to try and rehydrate her. She seemed to improve.
Dr. Newton decides to recreate the circumstances in which Rachel recovered, pulling her off all her IVs except for the sugar water.
Rachel started responding. She would look at us.
She had movements of her eyes and mouth and increased muscle activity as well.
Finally, Dr. Newton thinks he may know what's behind Rachel's mysterious decline. And to confirm his hunch, he performs one more blood test.
We were just waiting for the result from the test.
That wait seemed like forever.
From the blood test, it was clear Rachel had maple syrup urine disease.
Maple syrup urine disease is an extremely rare genetic disorder. In a healthy individual, certain enzymes break down amino acids found in protein-rich foods. But in patients like Rachel, those enzymes are absent, allowing the amino acids to wreak havoc on the brain.
Maple syrup urine disease is a deficiency of an enzyme necessary to break down 3 amino acids, leucine, isoleucine, and valine. These amino acids are in every protein: milk, meat, soy. You can't have food without these amino acids in it. Basically, the formula she was eating was killing her because of her inability to metabolize those 3 amino acids.
Initially hearing maple syrup urine disease, I thought, what a crazy name.
The name maple syrup urine disease is because the urine characteristically has a smell like maple syrup. A breakdown product of one of those 3 amino acids, specifically isoleucine, smells like maple syrup.
I just remember thinking, I've never heard of it.
With the diagnosis in hand, it's now clear that Rachel's crying was not a result of colic at all, but rather the first sign of the disease setting in.
She was crying and irritable because the amino acids were building up in her brain, making her abnormal.
But by the time Sherwood found Rachel completely unresponsive, the amino acids had already reached a toxic level.
Rachel started to become non-responsive because of the increased levels of the amino acids affecting her brain.
As her brain began to shut down, Rachel's body soon followed. The stiffness that doctors mistook for meningitis was also symptomatic of the disease.
Rachel didn't have normal muscle tone because the increased amino acids in the brain affect all brain function, and that would include muscle activity as well.
Ultimately, the toxins built up to the point where her brain could no longer perform critical life-sustaining operations.
The coma is just sort of the ultimate end result. The brain is functioning so poorly that it sort of shuts down.
Rachel's diagnosis has come not a moment too soon. Had her disease progressed any further, it would almost certainly have killed her.
When we saw the symptoms that Rachel had, we saw how serious the disease was, that she could die, and that most children do die within a week of life if they're not diagnosed. We felt very thankful because she had survived.
Harrowing though Rachel's ordeal has been, there is a relatively simple way to keep toxic levels of amino acids from building up and attacking her brain.
Treatment is basically to provide a formula where those 3 amino acids have been removed.
And within just a few hours of receiving the new formula, Rachel begins to slowly rebound.
It was great to finally see her respond to me, to look at me.
We knew that she would recover. We just didn't know how well she would recover, how fully she would recover. Our understanding would be that the elevated levels of the amino acids in the brain cells for those first 3 months of her life, they poisoned some of the brain cells so severely, those cells could never fully recover.
Only time will tell if Rachel will be able to walk or talk someday.
We were just kind of blown away. But what will happen next? We didn't know what the future held.
As they contemplate what lies ahead for their daughter, the Webbs can't help but wonder why Rachel wasn't diagnosed sooner.
With all the things that medicine can do, it seemed odd that it would take so long to figure this out.
It was tricky to diagnose because, first and foremost, it's so incredibly uncommon. Around 1 in every 200,000 births have maple syrup urine disease. And the initial symptoms were so nonspecific. Testing for maple syrup urine disease is now a part of newborn screening in all 50 states.
Today, Rachel is bravely living with a disease that changed her life forever.
Rachel's doing well now. She is 17. She's in regular school. She's physically disabled.
She has trouble with speech articulation. She speaks and knows what she wants to say, just has trouble getting it out in a way that you can clearly understand.
Dr. Newton continues to supervise Rachel's special diet, which is all important in keeping her alive and well.
Rachel's diet is basically extraordinarily limited in protein. She is allowed to eat some other foods that have no protein, and she eats a special formula that does not have those 3 amino acids.
But despite her many challenges, Rachel continues to embrace life in all its facets.
You never want your child to have to go through what we've been through, what she's been through, but you're glad that there's good things that come from it.
Rachel is very happy. I would say she's the happiest one in our family. She goes to bed with a smile and wakes up with a smile. It was funny about what?